Shalom, my friends. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol niyah b'dvaro. L'chaim. One of the important themes in this week's Torah portion is the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim, welcoming guests. The Torah tells us in great detail how Abraham, our forefather, saw three men passing by his tent as he was sitting there, and he ran out to greet them and welcome them into his home. And then we know the Torah writes everything very briefly. And sometimes even very important precepts in the Torah are just one or two words or a verse here and there. And then the Talmud would come and explain us the meticulous explanation of those few words. Yet in this week's Torah portion, over the course of 10 verses, the Torah uses more than 100 words to tell us exactly how Abraham and Sarah prepared the food for their guests, the menu they made, the bread they baked, and the flour they used. It tells us how Abraham ran to get cattle, and he instructed his servant to prepare it, and he gave them milk and butter, and how he prepared the main course and all the details, and he served them like a waiter in a fancy restaurant, tending to their every need. It's a very interesting story and an informative story. But why the elaboration? So the sages explain us that this is a hallmark of how to host guests. Abraham was a kind man. He knew how to take hachnasat orchim, to welcome guests to the next level. But friends, this entire episode is a bit perplexing. As we know, Abraham's guests were not human. They were angels. Angels are not hungry. Angels are not thirsty. And the difference between a delicious piece of meat and the mustard that he served them, or if it would be chicken or anything else, really doesn't make a difference to angels. Why did Abraham work so diligently to serve the angels such a beautiful, elaborate meal? It seems like it's a waste of time, a waste of money. And the great commentary Rashi states on the Talmud on this topic, he says, do you really think the angels ate bread? The angels were appearing as if they ate the bread and drank the delicious fresh food that he made for them and the drinks that he put on the table. And the Talmud explains a simple rule of etiquette, that one should respect the local customs and never depart from them. As when Moses went up to heaven to receive the Torah for 40 days and 40 nights, he refrained from eating and drinking. He was above human at that point. He was an angel, and he deferred to the ways of heaven. So when the angels come down over here to be guests of Abraham, and he was seeking guests, and he placed food in front of them, they behaved accordingly. Because as the saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Or at least let everyone at least think that you're doing as the Romans do. So if the angels need no food, and they were only pretending to eat out of deference to the local custom, why did Abraham have to prepare such a fancy, beautiful meal, gourmet dishes? They must probably didn't even enjoy it. And even more, one of the key lessons that the rabbis derive from this episode, when Abraham tended to the guests who were angels, is that when Abraham ran to serve the guest, he was actually in the middle of a conversation with God, because God came to visit him and heal him as he did a circumcision, a bris milah at a very old age. As Abraham was talking to God, Abraham interrupted God, like to welcome the guest. He said, God, hold on. And the rabbis say, look how great is the mitzvah of welcoming guests. It's greater than the Shekhinah, having God in your presence. I mean, wow, is that justified? To put God on hold to run for the guest? But if the men were angels and never even ate the food, is that even the mitzvah of having guests in your home? I mean, did Abraham really provide angels with any of their needs? Does this illusionary dog and pony show of doing in Rome as the Romans do justify to putting God on hold, interrupting, saying, God, hold on, I got to take care of the guest? Now, we must assume that Abraham knew what he was doing. And if knowing that his guests were angels, Abraham deemed it proper to interrupt God and serve them this lavish feast, and if the rabbis view this as the epitome of welcoming guests, that must be the case, that Abraham knew what's going on. What's going on here? And in fact, the Rebbe actually explains that it's precisely because his guests were angels that Abraham's conduct here speaks so loudly and profoundly about what it truly means to have achnasat orchim, what it truly means and how to welcome guests into your home. As we shall see, this story actually beautifully illustrates the special quality of this mitzvah and why it takes such prominence, even amongst various other forms of tzedakah that we show one to another. At first glance, tzedakah and kindness are really the same thing. Tzedakah is an expression of kindness by providing for someone else's needs. But tzedakah only represents a monetary sort of chesed. You're giving them money. It fills their wallet of the person in need. Yet God expects much more than money from us. We must also engage in gemilut chasadim, which means acts of kindness. In addition to filling a person's in their wallet and giving them money, we also must fill their soul. Financial support can give another person means to live, but a deeper form of chesed, a deeper form of kindness, is giving them a reason to live. For example, if you're walking down the street and you give a poor person a few dollars to buy food, that's a beautiful mitzvah. You've sustained this poor man's body. But the Torah also wants us to help others by sustaining their dignity. And that is why we have the mitzvah to lend money without interest. The highest form of giving, because it helps a person in a respectable way. So when you teach a man to fish, you're actually giving him much more than food. You're giving them a vote of confidence in their ability to be self-sufficient. But what is the highest form of chesed? The highest form of kindness? It's a welcoming guest. Because welcoming guests is all about making another person feel at home. It's about making the guest feel welcome and wanted and important. Telling the guest, you have friends who find your presence desirable. They enjoy being in your company. Someone new comes to town, they don't know anyone, and they haven't yet found their place in the community. Here the Torah tells us how to open our hearts. Embrace them warmly. Invite them into your home. Listen to them. Smile to them. While a monetary gift actually elevates them materially, but the gift of hachnasat orchim, of hosting guests, elevates the person on every level, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and yes, also materially. You see, welcoming guests is not just about providing for our guests' material needs, about putting a beautiful meal on the table. It's not only a bed that your guest needs, because he can always find a hotel. It's not only food that he needs, because he can always go out to buy food. But there's one thing you cannot buy, and that's a sense of belonging. For every person craves to feel like part of a family. Hachnasat orchim gives the gift of family, the gift of pure acceptance, the gift of non-negotiable love. Hachnasat orchim, welcoming guest, is nothing less than giving your heart. And now we understand why Abraham's treatment of the angels is considered hachnasat orchim, hosting guests, even though they were angels. And the highest form of it, even though they didn't need food. Because hachnasat orchim, having guests in your home, is not just about giving food, it's about giving the gift of belonging. Now Abraham, we know, was a spiritual giant. The Merkava, which means he was the chariot conduit of the divine in this world. Just a moment before he ran to his guest, what was he doing? Abraham was actually hanging out with God. For a guest to be welcomed with open arms, served personally by such a man, can elevate and transform the guest's entire life. And this is the gift that Abraham gave the two angels. Not two angels, three angels. Each one came with another mission, as we know. They tell the story of two Jewish merchants who were traveling in Europe, were traveling home from a fair. And it was late Friday afternoon. The roads were icy and muddy. And they realized they're going to have to stop somewhere along the way for Shabbat. They're not going to make it home on time. They had no choice. They stopped at a nearby town and they knocked on the first door. They spotted a mezuzah. They said it must be a Jewish home. And they felt very uncomfortable showing up uninvited to someone's home just like that for Shabbat, so close to Shabbat. But we know Shabbat is Shabbat. You can't travel. You must do what you got to do. They knock on the door. An elderly man comes to the door. And they excused themselves for showing up so late, so close to Shabbat. They're not invited. The host said, listen, you can stay here. Not a problem. But it's going to cost you 1,000 rubles for the weekend, which is a large amount of money. The men looked at each other. Wow, that's more expensive than the Four Seasons Hotel. But they had no choice. 1,000 ruble for the weekend for 2 people. Extravagant amount of money. They took their money, they had it from their business in the market, and they gave it to him ready to celebrate Shabbos. They went to services and they came home. And they found the most beautiful table filled with all types of delicacies and fish and meat and challah and everything you can imagine. And they said, you know what? We paid a lot of money for this Shabbat, they said to each other. We are really going to make ourselves comfortable. And we're going to enjoy every dish on this table. And it was a feast. They shared the words of Torah. They sang melodies and ate more heartily than they had done in a long time. And this repeated itself the next morning for breakfast, the next afternoon. They just ate their hearts out. They said, look, we paid a lot of money for the Shabbat. At least let us enjoy it. Shabbat was over. They were saying goodbye to their host. And as they were on their way out, the host handed them an envelope. And inside the envelope was 1,000 rubles, the money they gave him. And he said, this is yours. They were baffled. He said, what do you mean? I mean, wasn't this the fee to stay here for Shabbat? You asked us, stay here for Shabbat, it cost 1,000 ruble. Why are you giving it back to me? The elderly man explained, when you arrived at my home yesterday, I could tell you were very, very uncomfortable coming to my home so close to Shabbat, uninvited. And you really didn't want to bother me. And you didn't really want to spend Shabbat in a stranger's home. But I really wanted you to enjoy the Shabbat. I wanted you to enjoy your stay. I wanted you to feel like you belonged here. As if this is your home, in your own town. The only way I was able to think of making that happen was to have you pay for it. And it worked. Because you dished out the money. You rightfully felt that all the dishes of delicacies and the lodging and everything we gave you was yours. Now that you enjoy the Shabbat, take your money back. And I'll take the mitzvah of hosting guests for Shabbat. That, my friends, is what real hachnasat orchim is all about. Hosting guests, about making a person feel in your home like they are in their own home. And on this basis, the Rebbe explains a very interesting statement in Maimonides. Maimonides writes that there's a positive rabbinic commandment to visit the sick. And there's a mitzvah to comfort the mourners. There's another mitzvah to help bring the bride to the chuppah. And then he said, there's a rabbinic commandment to escort the guest. Because we learn from Abraham and his kind ways of behavior. He would feed all of his passerbys, people that came to him. He gave them food, he gave them drink, and then he would escort them on their way. And escorting them out of their home, out of your home, surpasses all the other mitzvahs. That's the greatest part. So the Rebbe says, how could it be? How could escort your dinner's over? Why, if you walk your guests to the doors, are more important than taking care of them and giving them a whole meal? How could that be more valuable than the food that Abraham prepared and all the money he spent and all the effort he put in to say that we learned from Abraham, the greatest thing is to walk the guests to the door, escort them out. And the Rebbe said something so beautiful. He said, Hachnasat orchim, having guests in your home, is not just about giving food and drink. It's about making the guest feel comfortable. So when the meal is ongoing, the guest may be a bit self-conscious. He said, maybe I'm getting on my host's nerves. Maybe I'm overstaying my welcome. Maybe he doesn't enjoy my company. But when the meal ends and the host stands up and he walks with you to the door and he spends a few extra minutes by the door chatting with you, telling how wonderful it is to have you in his home, and he invites you to come back anytime and make yourself at home in my home, that's when he shows the guest that he really sincerely cares. He's basically effectively telling the guest, I enjoy your stay. And I want you to enjoy a few more minutes with you. Please know that my home is your home. That's when hosting really begins. That's when the guest feels truly comfortable. And therefore the Rebbe explains that escorting guests on their way defines the entire mitzvah. And that's why it's so great that we learned that from Abraham. And by the way, this distinguishes the mitzvah of welcoming guests from general tzedakah. Because we know that tzedakah is about helping other people. But there's really there's a famous question in Jewish law. Do you have to have intent when you give tzedakah? I mean, is it enough to be kind and have the act? of helping someone? Or is it that the benefactor receives the benefit? Meaning to say, do I have to have intent to give the person tzedakah? I mean, for example, let's say you're walking down the street and you drop $100 from your pocket. And a poor man comes by, picks it up, and uses it to buy food. Did you fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah? I mean, if the mitzvah requires intent, that means I have in mind that I'm doing it to help this person. That poor man got lucky, but you didn't fulfill a mitzvah because you just lost the money. You didn't have intent to give it to him. But if the main thing is that the poor man should be helped, knowingly or not, whether how you give it to him, you helped him a great deal. Which is it? What is the answer? Do I need intent or I don't need intent? So the Midrash says that if a coin falls out of your pocket, a person's hand, and a poor person finds it and is sustained by it, the Torah gives that person the merit. Meaning, you may be upset you lost the money, and you really wish you could have had it back. I mean, hardly a way to do a mitzvah. But the fact is, someone else found it, they did something good with it, you helped them, that's a merit. But no such an exception can be made when it comes to welcoming guests in your home. Because in this case, you know what the mitzvah is? How you're interacting with the person, how you're making them feel. It's surely about what you're giving him. It's very important. But it's more about how are they feeling when you're giving it to them. You know, I remember hearing a story about the Chassid in Israel who lived, he was part of a group of Chassidim, and he went to his wife, unfortunately, his wife passed away, and he had to raise his children on it by himself. So when he had to marry off his first child, the man came to his rabbi, and he asked for a blessing to marry off the child, and the rabbi blessed the young man, to get married, and he gave him a blessing, he should have a beautiful life. And he said to the father, who was a widower, had no wife, and he said, listen, do me a favor. On the night of the wedding, after the whole wedding is over and you come home, please call me. And he told his assistant, please make sure to pass the phone to me, even if it's midnight or 1 a.m, when you get the call from this man. A few months later, after the wedding, the man comes home and he calls the Rebbe because he told him to call. The phone rings, the secretary picks up, and Chassid apologized for calling so late. He explained the Rebbe told him, when I come home from the wedding, even if it's 1 a.m, no matter what it is, call me. So the secretary passes the phone to the Rebbe, and he was really shocked. He didn't know, what's the Rebbe going to ask him now? And the Rebbe asked this man a series of questions about every detail about the wedding. He said, how many guests came? How was the music? How was the caterer? How were the flowers? Was the dancing lively? And so on and so forth. The conversation finished, and the Rebbe's secretary said to him, I don't understand, I'm shocked. Why did you need this man? Well, first of all, why did you need to know all this information? How the music, how the guest, how the food. And also, why couldn't you wait till the morning? Why did you need him to call you at 1 o'clock in the morning when he comes home from the wedding? And the Rebbe explained that when a couple comes home from marrying off a child, they sit down for a cup of tea, and they have a debriefing session. They talk about how beautiful the simcha, the happy celebration was. They talk about who came, who said what, how was the food, how radiant the bride and groom looked, etc., and etc. Because that's what you have to do. But this chassid, he lost his wife years ago. He has nobody to have that conversation with. And without a doubt, when he came home from the wedding, he felt the need to share his great joy and his impressions of this momentous occasions in his life. But who's he going to share this with? He had no wife. That's why I told him to call. And that's why I asked him all of these questions that seem so mundane. And if I have a chance to be there for him at that moment, should I care if it's the middle of the night? You see, Abraham teaches us more than acting kindly to others. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. He gave us a much greater ideal to live up to, a Jewish sense of warmth and belonging that is ours to share with others. And that's what being Jewish is all about. Friends, I would like to conclude with a personal message related to what is happening in Israel now and around the world these days. During September and October of 1980, 43 years ago, the world seemed to be going to hell. Libya and Syria signed a pact to become one nation. War games were taking place in the east and the west in Germany. The Turkish government was overthrown. The former Nicaraguan president was assassinated in Paraguay. The Iran-Iraq war commenced. Bob Marley was diagnosed with brain cancer. The Rue Copernic synagogue was bombed in Paris. And Brezhnev and Assad signed a treaty in Moscow. Somalia declared a state of emergency. And in Spain, 50 school children were killed in an explosion. And the SS poet en route from Delaware to Egypt went missing with 33 officers on board and was never found. Also, a bomb blasted a Beijing railway station. And of course, Iran was still holding American hostages. The world was chaos, if you remember. And it was a terrifying time. And our Rebbe of blessed memory, he addressed the Chassidim exactly 43 years ago this weekend, the 20th of Cheshvan, which in the English calendar was October 29, 1980. And he started by quoting a verse in Isaiah, where Isaiah says, "Behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and it grows darkness of the kingdoms." And the Rebbe spoke at great length about how one would think that the darkness was challenging enough, but we got an extra dose of darkness, a darkness upon darkness in the world. And how are you supposed to go on under such tough realities? How could a Jew live joyously when the world was dark with challenge after challenge and so on? And he went on to passionately quote Psalm 121, where it says, "Shir la ma'alot, esa einai elaharim me'ayin yavo ezri." A song of ascents, I raise my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? The word "from where" in Hebrew is me'ayin. But it can also be read as a statement, not as a question, which is, I raise my eyes to the mountains, and my help will come from ayin, which means from the essence of God, which is from where. Ayin means a place of nothingness, purity, oneness, a place nature doesn't play a role. And the Rebbe said that we must remember that Jewish people don't operate on normal frequencies of survival. We have the ayin, we have the essence of God who's determined to keep us going. And that's why the psalm continues. He will not allow your foot to falter. Your guardian will not slumber. The Lord is your God. The Lord will guard you going and coming from now and eternity. So my dear friends, challenging times it is, but be uplifted, be inspired, be upbeat. For the Jewish people's beauty and love for life has been shining since October 7th, when the big, great tragedy happened, greater than ever before in my lifetime, and will continue to shine. People are together more than ever before. Don't give up. Don't surrender. Am Yisrael Chai isn't just a song. We're going to live on. We are together. We're one. We open our hearts. We bring good feelings to each other. Barriers have fallen down. And therefore, I want to suggest to you to recite Psalm 121 daily. Include the words of courage and of faith that we're not alone, that God is with us even when we don't see him, that the guardian of Israel neither slumber nor sleeps, and he will guard ours and your going and coming from now and for all times. So I want to ask you, friends, this week, let's be like Abraham and Sarah. Invite a friend over to celebrate Shabbat. Raise a glass of wine to your friends, to your guests and family, knowing that the promise that God gave to Abraham in this week's Torah portion, in last week's portion, he also mentions that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the heaven and the sand on the shores, is a real reality. And the land that God promised to our forefathers, that his children will dwell in this land, lavetach, was, is, and will always be so, as the word of God is eternal. Friends, we're going to go through these days together. Our brightest days are ahead. We await the time of Mashiach, when nations will not lift sword up against one nation. Nations amongst nations, swords will turn into plowshares. There won't be any more wars. No bloodshed or animosity. We will merit a world of peace and tranquility. And in the merit of the chesed, of the kindness, of opening up our personal homes, our micro temples of divine proportions to our fellow Jewish people and neighbors and friends and community. When God sees how open and embracing we are, and may he bring upon us the ultimate chesed, the ultimate kindness, the rebuilding of the third temple in Jerusalem, and the coming of Mashiach. Amen. I bless you, my friends, that you and I and all of our brethren around the world will open our hearts and open our homes and embrace our neighbors, our friends, and bring that same feeling of hachnasat orchim, of making the guests come into our home and make them feel so good and walk them to the door and tell them, I couldn't be me without you. We know at that point we will merit the greatest blessing. That is when God is going to open up his heart and he's going to fulfill the promise of the building of the third temple. And we're all going to be reunited in the holy city of Jerusalem. I wish you all, my friends, blessings of love, blessings of peace to our people in Israel and around the world. Shabbat Shalom, L'chaim, and look forward to a great Shabbat ahead of true peace, tranquility, where we're going to feel the Shekhinah, the presence of God in our home, in our life, and in our hearts. Have a good Shabbos.